Grab a seat in the Nosebleeds section and listen up. Week 2 and episode 2 of From the Nosebleeds MMA podcast is in your ear, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud. I'm Brick Harris alongside Blake O'Rulian, here to provide a weekly update for fighters by fighters on all things MMA. Whether it be cage side or from the cheap seats, we got you. Special thanks to Robert Jamais and Don't Be a Richard Music for helping us make this show what it is. Blake, quick riddle. Name a better time to be a fight fan.
I'm not good at riddles, and I'm not good at answering that question, but I can tell you it's a great time to be a fight fan for a lot of reasons. Coming up in today's show, we will be covering Shevchenko Carmouche and what the women's flyweight division needs. Also, our reaction from the graphic and entertaining bout between Mike Perry and Vicente Luque. Later on, we'll cover Frankie Edgar moving down to 135 and get our analysis on the biggest fights coming up on the very stacked UFC 241 card. To close the show, Brick and I will take some time to express some of our final thoughts, but first, we want to begin with something we like to call Turning It Back Tuesdays. Brick and I will be going over a piece of MMA history that is applicable to this week's news in the world of mixed martial arts. With Nate Diaz and Anthony Pettis fighting, I thought we could turn it back to April of 2013. Back in the day, a 16-8, 28-year-old Nate Diaz took on Josh Thompson, an up-and-coming UFC lightweight star. In the second round, a busted up and bloodied Nate got rocked and then hit with a straight right, and was ground and pounded until there was a stoppage. That is the only time in Nate Diaz's 15-year career that he has been knocked out. However, my question for you, Brick, is do you think we see Nate's second knockout against Anthony Pettis this Saturday?
I think it is an interesting question, and we did go to Instagram and ask our followers, our viewers, if they thought that this was the people's main event, and they answered yes, and I honestly have to agree. I think it's very interesting, and there's two points of Anthony Pettis' history that I'd like to bring up that might answer this question. Number one, December 16th, 2010, WEC 53, Anthony Pettis has possibly the greatest head kick in mixed martial arts history, documented history, of course. Knocking down Benson Henderson, he would go on to win the fight, but that highlight reel will forever live in MMA grandeur. Just amazing. The second point of Anthony Pettis' history is more recent, was his knockout of Stephen Thompson. Again, using the cage, actually.
Using the cage, the Superman punch right off of the cage to knock him out.
Exactly. So those are two instances where Anthony Pettis has shown us that he has knockout abilities that not many other fighters have. Also, Nate Diaz is coming off a 3-year couch sitting period. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it's an incredible prospect of a fight.
It will be very interesting. And that's just a little bit of a sneak peek of what we will be talking about later on in the show. Let's move it over to round 1. Valentina Shevchenko took on Liz Carmouche and defeated her in a decision win this weekend. So with this...
I'm sorry. Did you say Shevchenko Carmouche?
Yes, I did say Shevchenko Carmouche. What were your thoughts? What were your initial thoughts coming off of that fight?
I just gave them to you.
That's your full thing.
Oh,
That's all of your thoughts on that.
Exactly.
It was a little bit slower of a fight, a little bit harder to watch. However, what I will say is I think Shevchenko is too good, too strong, and had way too much pressure for Carmouche. Shevchenko avenges her first MMA loss back in 2010 and defeats her after 5 rounds, which I thought was great. But this is not really what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the matchup. What I want to talk about is what's next. And what I want to ask, I guess, as well is what do we know about Valentina Shevchenko? She used to fight at 135, but she fights her best, and she looks basically unstoppable at 125. The UFC women's flyweight division looks pretty much beaten and battered out. There's not really a whole lot of prospects for her to beat. She beat Jessica Ai in 2 rounds. She beat Liz Carmouche pretty easily. So I want to take it from the women's side over to the men's side. And no, I do not want to talk about Henry Cejudo fighting Valentina Shevchenko. That's the last thing I want to talk about. But about 8-9 months ago, Dana White was considering shutting down the flyweight division because it was so light. There was not enough good prospects in there to fight Demetrius Johnson or a Henry Cejudo. So how did the flyweights come back? Henry Cejudo had to bring in fighters from other divisions. Who did they bring on? One of the best 135ers of all time in TJ Dillashaw. Henry Cejudo defeats him, saves the flyweights, and now we've got a big fight coming up, hopefully in the works, between Henry Cejudo and Joseph Benavidez. I see that the women's flyweight division really needs some help in terms of getting some more star power in that division. So who do we bring on? I'm not suggesting that we bring down Amanda Nunes, because we could see from her weight cut at UFC 239 against Holly Holm, she had a very difficult time. At least it looked like, cutting down to that weight. If you follow her on social media and things like that, it was more difficult than it's been in the past. And I think a part of that is her coming back from a 145 bout against Chris Cyborg. So with that being said, I did a little bit of research and I saw a couple of fighters that I would really like to see move up from strawweight, 115 pounds, to challenge Valentina Shevchenko and I think have an actual chance. We have Jessica Andrade, who is the current champion, who fought at 135 pounds from the ages of 20 from the years 2011 to 2015. Another one that's a really good one, and I honestly think that this would be maybe a good move for her and a great fight in terms of the promotion in general. Tatiana Suarez, one of the best female wrestlers in the UFC currently. She's undefeated, ranked number 2 and in the UFC in the strawweight division. However, her first 3 pro MMA fights were at 125 and won each of them. The last one I want to suggest is Nina Ansaroff, the fiance of Amanda Nunes. She has fought at flyweight in the past as well, and I think that'd be a really fun promotion, being that Nina is the fiance of Nunes, and Nunes has fought Shevchenko as well. I think that would be a lot of fun for the UFC to pull up in a promotion.
In round 2, I would love to talk about Vicente Luque versus Mike Perry, because I think there are some interesting questions to be asked about that fight.
Now we're thinking, what's next for Vicente Luque? What's next for Mike Perry? People want to see Mike Perry again, and people want to see Vicente Luque again. As for Vicente Luque, he's now won 6 straight fights, putting him at the top of the welterweight division in terms of winning streak. And I think that a big marquee name next in a return would be so much fun for him and really put him up in the totem pole in terms of championship talk, if that were something for him that he would be interested in, which I'm sure he would. Hats off to both. I think Mike Perry, despite the loss, gained respect and the eyes and the fans of so many MMA fans following this, not to mention how many fans he already had coming into this.
I think that fight was amazing. Cut and simple. I think Mike Perry is a dog. I think Mike Perry has so many fan favorite qualities that guys like Nate Diaz have, and guys like Justin Gaethje have, and guys that Dustin Poirier have. However, my thoughts about that welterweight bout, and if you heard what I said just before the word bout, I said welterweight, and I think that is the only problem that I have with that fight. Not that I didn't enjoy it, not that I didn't like it, but the fact that those guys have a combined plus 10 losses, I think taints it a little bit. Vicente Luque is an amazing fighter. He's on a crazy hot streak. Mike Perry is a dog in the UFC and a fan favorite, as I already said. But there is way, and I mean way too much going on in the grand scheme of the welterweight division for this fight to have raised either of their stocks in terms of championship contention. But what I'm saying is the fact that the welterweight division is so stacked with Usman, Covington, George Masvidal, and guys like Ben Askren, and all the drama that's turning around Tyron Woodley going up to Canada to train. He's going to be a different animal when he comes back. But the welterweight division is just so saturated with drama, with great fighters, with guys who have one loss. George Masvidal is on a tear. Leon Edwards is on a tear. There's just so much going on in the welterweight division. It's hard to say that this fight will be anything more than a fight of the night.
You don't think that Vicente Luque versus Stephen Thompson is something that people want to see?
Oh, I'm not saying that. I think it definitely is. I think the welterweight division is so stacked.
Just so stacked.
Unbelievably stacked. Like, sure, Stephen Thompson, George Masvidal, Darren Till, like, you've got all these guys who are maybe second, third tier welterweights, but I just don't think that they're going to be in the discussion for a belt for the next 6-7 months.
I got you. I understand. Okay. I completely agree with you in terms of I don't think there's any sort of title contention anytime soon. Maybe for Vicente Luque if he keeps his hot streak and beats a big name like a Darren Till, like maybe a Leon Edwards. I don't know. That was such an incredible performance by both of them that their stock raises, and I think that this makes them more marketable for the rest of the fans of the UFC. Doesn't necessarily mean title contention, but it does put a good name on them and on the welterweight division.
Round 3, here we come. We're finally here. This, I'm telling you, I lost sleep over this. My notes, I'm so excited to get to this and finally get to talk about it. Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic 2.
I think that this is going to be such a fun fight. Like you said, just a little bit over a year ago, they fought. Daniel Cormier catches Stipe with an elbow, knocks him out cold. So I have a couple of stats. I did a little bit of research thanks to MMA On Point, which is a YouTube channel. And I found out, Brick, 82% of champions coming into a title rematch will leave as the champion. So to kind of break that down, Daniel Cormier has an 82% chance coming into this because he's walking in as the champion. So Cormier is favored in terms of that chance. However, I'm going to suggest really quickly, and I know you haven't asked me yet, but I'm going to be Mr. Hot Take. I'm going to be the 18%. I think Stipe catches Cormier early and knocks him out cold, and this will set Daniel Cormier into the sunset, and he will end his career after this fight on Saturday night.
Wow.
That's my thought.
You're putting him in his coffin.
I'm not putting him in his coffin. Stipe is putting him into his coffin.
But you are calling that Saturday, DC's MMA career will unofficially end.
I think it officially ends. I think he leaves his gloves in the octagon. I really do.
Okay. Very, very interesting. See, that's why I'm so excited about this fight, is because there is a lot of controversy. Stipe Miocic, okay, let's just talk about him for a little bit. He has 3 losses in his professional career. 3. He lost to Stefan Struve in 2012, okay, Junior Dos Santos, a legend, in 2014, and Daniel Cormier last summer, 2018. Stipe has never been submitted. He has 13 KO wins and 1 submission win. Daniel Cormier was Stipe's first loss in almost 5 years. The way Stipe took the heavyweight belt was emphatic. He took it from Fabricio Verdum in 2016, and he caught him with a hook, and he dropped him like a sack of Croatian potatoes. Okay? Very similar to the way that DC dropped Stipe. Very similar. The knockouts are very, very similar. Since he knocked out Verdum, Stipe defended his title 3 different times against legends. Alistair Overeem, I believe, Junior Dos Santos, and Francis Ngannou. Then he lost to DC by KO.
So that's what's happened.
Right.
What's going to happen?
Well, now Daniel Cormier. Why I think he's going to win this fight.
Okay.
He was 15-0 in his first 15 fights. Only loss ever was to John Jones. Here's the list of people that Daniel Cormier has beat. Frank Mir, Roy Nelson, Dan Henderson, Anthony Rumble Johnson twice, Alexander Gustafsson, Anderson Silva, Volkan Oezdemir, Stipe Miocic, Derek Lewis. John Jones, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is DC's kryptonite. And whether or not he's going to have a third chance to face that, I don't know. But I think that if Daniel Cormier wins this fight, which I personally think that he will because of how smart he was against Stipe, he knew he wasn't going to beat him standing up. He knew he doesn't have the reach. He knew he doesn't have the same amount of power. But he was smart, and he went to the clinch, and he knocked Stipe from the clinch, knowing that that was the only way he was going to beat him. So I think it's going to be close. But I think Daniel Cormier is a seasoned enough, experienced enough, and smart enough fighter to do again what he did last summer.
He said on ESPN First Take this morning with Stephen A. Smith and Will Kane that he plans to, if his game plan isn't going the right way, he will take Stipe to the ground and just wrestle him and empty that gas tank. That is the only way he wins this fight. And if Stipe catches him early, I do not see the size differential. I hate saying this because I think Daniel Cormier is one of the greatest fighters of all time. However, I do think Stipe is a little too big for him. I think Cormier is a little older. I think he's got those gray hairs in his beard. I think it is being overlooked, the age. I think that all of these different things might be a little bit too much for Daniel Cormier, and that's why I come to this conclusion. However, I wanted to really quickly, before we finish out this round, get a couple of thoughts really quick. If Daniel Cormier wins, what's next?
2 words. They both start with J. And these 2 words have beaten Daniel Cormier and given him his only losses in his life.
What weight class?
See, that's the thing. That was so interesting this morning because I got on, I think it was Ariel Helwani's show that I didn't get on it, but I watched it. And he had quotes from both John Jones and Daniel Cormier. He had a formal interview with Daniel Cormier over FaceTime or whatever. And Daniel Cormier was saying the ball is in my court. I can fight Jones or not fight Jones if I want to or if I don't want to. John Jones quickly replied, I believe on social media, saying, "Don't worry, guys. There's not going to be a third fight. Daniel Cormier is scared of me."
He is convinced it will not happen.
Right.
However, I agree. I don't think it happens. I don't think John Jones wants it. I don't think Daniel Cormier wants it. I don't think Daniel Cormier, in all honesty, I know he says he wants to get down to 205. I don't know if that's even a possibility for him. He's walking around at 240 right now. And at the beginning of his training camp, he was walking around above the heavyweight limit of 265. He is so big. I don't think he gets back down. The only way I see it happening, and I would actually like to see it this way, he goes up to John Jones goes up to heavyweight, gets that double champ status, and now there's not even a question, because he's been clean, there's not even a question of, is John Jones better than Daniel Cormier? He's beaten him at both the weight classes that they can fight at. However, I think the more interesting thing is if Stipe wins this fight. If Stipe wins this fight, he's pretty much he's taken out everybody. He's beaten Francis Ngannou. He's beaten Daniel Cormier. Who's left for him to fight? I think the person that is John Jones comes up to fight at 265. Well, not at 265, but at heavyweight and faces off against Stipe Miocic. I think that would be one of the best fights of, one of the best heavyweight bouts of all time. And it would really go to see how great John Jones is, just how great he actually is. So those are my thoughts on what happens after the fight between Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic.
Maybe it's the hopeless romantic in me that wants, the last fight that I put my whole heart and soul into. Hopefully not the last, but Daniel Cormier and John Jones 3. I think it's just a trilogy ending. I really, really want it to happen as a fight fan because I think at that point it's the battle of the two greatest of all time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about GOATs and legends and champions and the difference between the three, but this weekend is so huge for Daniel Cormier because he has flirted with the conversation of retirement before, talked a little bit about it today, but I think it will be huge for Stipe Miocic to win this fight, I agree, but if Daniel Cormier wins this fight, he has probably one of the biggest decisions to make in his life as far as his legacy goes. He could hang up the shoes after beating Stipe, which is great, but at the same time, he will always have John Jones's voice in the back of his head. He could hang up the shoes after losing to Stipe, but he also said yesterday in an interview with Ariel Helwani that he does not want his family to see him as the guy at the end of a fight who does not have his hand raised.
Absolutely. 82% of champs coming into a title rematch end up champ leaving that second match. We'll see how it goes. Round 4, here we come.
Edgar to bantamweight.
Yes.
Initial thoughts.
I love it. I think this is going to be so much fun. I think this turns the division upside down. I think this leaves the featherweights thinking, I think this is a great thing for Frankie Edgar. He's been a champion at 155. He beat BJ Penn back in the day. He was not able to do it at 45, but 45 is just stacked with so many legends between Jose Aldo when he came into the division, Conor McGregor and his reign and how dominant he was there, and then Max Holloway, what he's been able to do for the last few years has been absolutely undeniable. I think it's smart for Frankie to go down to 135. Despite the fact that Henry Cejudo is there at the top of the totem pole, with TJ Dillashaw being gone, it almost left an unrest, a crazy idea of who really is going to be the champ. And right now it's Henry Cejudo, but I don't think that's set in stone. There's a lot of people that have a chance to take over. Aljamain Sterling, Uriah Faber came back and he looks great. And I don't think he necessarily deserves a title shot right off the top of this first win, but it's something to think about.
I do have a decent amount to say about Frankie Edgar as a fighter, his history, and kind of why he's where he is right now. So, take you back to 2012 versus Benson Henderson. Frankie Edgar in the rematch against Benson Henderson at UFC 150, fighting at lightweight for the belt. Frankie Edgar, in my opinion, got robbed. The stats are right in front of me. Frankie Edgar had more takedowns. He had more total strikes. He had more significant strikes. He had a better takedown percentage, and he had one more submission attempt than did Benson Henderson. So that fight, to me, although it was for a title and it was a big deal, I think is being downplayed in the career of Frankie Edgar just because of how he has responded to that loss. Since then, Frankie Edgar has not held the belt. So what has it been? 7 years since Frankie Edgar has held a belt in any division he's fought in?
Correct.
He's lost to Jose Aldo twice. Jose Aldo's not a scrub. I'm just saying He has beaten Jose Aldo in the past, but after that Benson Henderson loss, I think Frankie Edgar has changed. And now, something that I really want to just hit on and say really quick is that there is a difference between fighters who move weight classes to find answers and fighters who move weight classes to find problems. Just an example. You've got fighters like Frankie Edgar. He's gone from lightweight to featherweight, now to bantamweight, because he lost his belt 7 years ago and he hasn't held it since. He's gotten beaten up a couple. He has some good wins, but he's gotten beaten up a couple of times, a few times, and he's looking to become bigger and better. There's one word that I would use to describe Frankie Edgar at this moment, and that is relevant. Nothing more, but nothing less. He hasn't been in title contention necessarily for a while, although he did just lose the belt, or not lose the belt, but lose the title fight to Max Holloway. I'm just saying that Frankie Edgar, since losing the belt in 2012, has not looked the same. He's been relevant, though. He's a great fighter. He's got great cardio. He's a dog. And the fact that he's moving down again, I think he's got the bantamweight class shaking. I think they are nervous. They know he's been up against bigger guys. They know he's been against stronger guys. And the fact that he's, as experienced as he is, I think he is a relevant fighter, and he will be making a scourge towards the title of the bantamweight division. But there's a difference between guys like Frankie Edgar and guys like Conor McGregor, Daniel Cormier, TJ Dillashaw. Those guys moved up weight classes looking for problems. Conor McGregor, for example, hey, I'll fight you, Nate Diaz. I know you're a welterweight, but bring it on. Let's
Jumps
go.
2 weight classes. He hasn't fought at 155 yet.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And Daniel Cormier then moves up to heavyweight. He's like, I need something new. Give me something bigger. Give me something badder. Maybe it was to help him out with weight cut, but he wanted to be the title of the baddest man on the planet. Whereas the contrast is Frankie Edgar is going, help me out. What can I do? I need to win.
Yeah. 37 years old. You can tell he's really hungry for that belt. After 31 total mixed martial arts bouts professionally, it is going to be really exciting to see this almost fresh transition for him. So that'll be fun.
We're finally to round 5. It was a loaded show, tons of things to talk about, but we are in the final championship round 5, Diaz, Pettis, and what comes after.
All right. So I got a few things I want to get off my mind. I think right off the top, I think Anthony Pettis wins this fight. And I know there's a lot of people. Nate is the fan favorite. Nate is the original guy of the UFC that everybody wants to see come back and win. He's beaten Conor McGregor. That boosted his fame and so much. But Pettis wins this fight because Diaz going to decision is 3-9 in his career. And Pettis feels now at 170 that he has found his true weight class. And we talked about it earlier. How did he prove that? He goes and knocks out the number 5 welterweight in the world who was on an absolute tear in Stephen Thompson. I also think there's another really important piece that not enough people are talking about, and that's something that we call in jiu-jitsu time on the mat. Now, I'm not saying that Nate Diaz is some sort of scrub that hasn't been training. He's absolutely been training. I follow him on all the social media platforms, and he's been training. He's with Kron Gracie. He's with his boxing coach. He's doing a lot of these different things. However, I can't imagine, and I've never walked into the UFC octagon, but I can't imagine the toll of having cameras around and doing interviews and doing press conferences and doing open workouts and things like that, and the travel and all of these different things. That's got to be a little more difficult than waking up every morning and going to your gym where you train with the same people every day. Nate Diaz hasn't been in the UFC octagon. The lights haven't been on him. The press hasn't been there in the last 3 years. Diaz can train all day long, but it's not the same thing when you actually walk into that octagon. I think on the mental side, I think this is going to be a little bit more difficult for Nate Diaz than he would think. I think the last 3 years, he's put a lot of toll on his body. You can see it in his face. You can see it in his body. You can see in his interviews. He is sort of, I don't want to say struggling. I don't want to say that by any means, but I think that he is not the same fighter that he was when he fought Conor McGregor and defeat Conor McGregor and then had the very close decision loss against Conor McGregor in 2016. I think it's going to be a very interesting bout. However, I'm very excited to see what this is. And like you guys all said on Instagram, this is the people's main event. This is going to be so much fun. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope Nate Diaz comes back and is a hero, but I just don't know if that's a possibility with all the circumstances against him.
One thing's for sure is that there's no shortage of bad blood between these two. although it's not one of those rivalries like a DC John Jones, there is plenty of bad blood. And that's why I think we're going to see a good fight. But the way that I want to determine the winner of this, I think it's a fight of cardio, honestly. You mentioned that Nate Diaz hasn't been in that situation, that high pressure situation, in years. Anthony Pettis is walking off an incredible, his last fight was absolutely unbelievable. However, both of these fighters have shown a little bit of a slump over the last, I don't know, decade, you could say. Both of them are legends in their own right. Both of them have tons of fights under their belt. Both of them have very impressive resumes. But you could say that both of them have hit a slump either recently or they're still in it, possibly Nate Diaz. Meaning, Anthony Pettis, he went 6.5 years without a KO win. He is 22-8 right now, so he's been knocked out 3 times. He's got a pretty good knockout history with fights that he's taken and fights that, he's won. He's never been submitted, meaning he's lost 5 fights to the decision. Nate Diaz has lost 9 fights to the decision. Both of these guys can go the distance. Both of them are great strikers. Both of them can grapple. I think what is going to make the difference in this fight is cardio. Can Nate Diaz reprove that he has the cardio that he had to stand with Conor McGregor?
I absolutely agree. And I think that's another piece that puts Nate Diaz against the cage. Anthony Pettis went 5 rounds with Tony Ferguson, with one of the best, with arguably the best cardio machine in the world. And yeah, these guys have a lot of miles on them. But at the end of the day, I think that Anthony Pettis's gas tank is going to be a lot for Nate Diaz. And it's going to be very telling of where Nate Diaz goes after this. But I think you hit it right on the nail in terms of cardio. This is going to be a battle of who can last the longest unless there is a very quick knockout of some sort. Who knows who that is, but my vote is Anthony Pettis.
I was going to say, I think Anthony Pettis, seeing that he's fought so many more times in the recent years than Nate Diaz, I think he has more of a chance.
Seven training camps, 7 fights, 7 press conferences. I think this goes to Anthony Pettis in terms of experience.
I agree.
So with all 5 rounds done and in the books, we wanted to turn it over to our last segment of the day called Final Thoughts. We wanted to take some time for each of us to have the floor and talk about anything on our minds relevant to the MMA world. Just a few minutes to get our thoughts out there with anything else on our minds. With that, I want to hand it over to Brick for our first installment of Final Thoughts.
Legends, champions, and GOATs. That is what I want to talk about in my final thoughts because I have wrestled with this a lot, and I think that honestly there are 3 types of greats in the MMA world, in the UFC world, whatever it may be. Legends, champions, and GOATs. Greatest of all time, not farm animals. I think, in my opinion, there are champions, okay? You've got fighters like Cody Garbrandt. You've got fighters like Frankie Edgar. You got fighters like Anthony Pettis. Fighters who have held a UFC title at one point, whether they held it for a day or whether they held it for 10 years, they will be known as a former UFC champion, which is huge, okay? Then you have UFC or MMA legends. These are the guys that you tell your kids about. These are the types of guys that you're angry that you weren't able to watch because you were too young. And there are a few of those for me, like Chuck Liddell, you know what I'm saying? People like that. But legends, in my opinion, are of the likes of Nate Diaz. Huge personality, lots of wins, very talented fighter. Robbie Lawler, again, lots of losses, tons of wins, just a legend with his cardio, with how hard he went in every single fight. Legends like, I'm sure Stipe Miocic will go down as a legend no matter what happens. These types of fighters who separate themselves from champions because they either have loud personalities or because they do something different than your average UFC champion who holds the belt for X amount of months. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is GOATs, because there is a category in the UFC that distinguishes GOATs from legends. Now, legends are guys who maybe have 10 plus losses, but that just kind of attributes to their legacy. The fact that whether they lost or they won, they came back fighting. No one in the UFC goes 0-10. No legend goes 0-10. A legend will go 25-10. You know what I'm saying? My biggest appreciation for GOATs in this sport right now is the fact that we are living among them. We are walking amongst GOATs, and maybe we don't realize it. But fighters like Daniel Cormier, who have continuously showed the little guy that you can beat up someone who has a bigger reach than you. You can beat up someone who's taller than you. Guys like John Jones, who can come back from adversity, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or with the law, you can always come back. You can always turn your life around and become a champion again. These types of guys are guys that we need to be looking up to more, because not necessarily because they win fights and they're on TV, but because they are examples of what a greatest of all time really has the potential to be.
Time for my final thoughts of the week. We talked about this last week, and I wanted to revisit the idea and stir the pot a little bit. So I've got a couple of questions. First one, who is the most hated man in the history of MMA? Who is the original trash talker promoter of MMA? Who is the supervillain? Who is the bad guy? Chael Sonnen was the bad guy. Chael Sonnen had beef with every single guy that he fought, so much that some of his opponents will not talk to him to this day. John Jones being an example. Anderson Silva and all the things that he did. The infamous story of the Nogueira brothers feeding a carrot to a bus. The beautiful thing that made Chael so great is that he never broke that character. He never stopped being the bad guy. Does that sound like someone we know? It's not Connor. It's not Nate. It's not Masvidal. People like them too much. It's Colby Covington. Colby Covington wants to be the Chael Sonnen of MMA today. I would go far enough to say that Chael could even be writing some of the material for him that he has. I would go far enough to say that Chael could be even writing some of this material for him that he has a little behind-the-scenes role in building up Colby as to who he's becoming. Chael has said on the record that Matt Hughes was aware of the train comment and that it was coming. Maybe Chael has a little more insight than we think. Maybe Chael was the one who thought of that line, handing over the torch from one bad guy to the next. Two wrestlers out of Oregon, two collegiate stars, Oregon State and Oregon, both sociology degrees, two guys who value the art and understand the necessity of having someone to hate. Sounds like almost the same person, if you ask me. Even if Chael is not in the process of at least writing for Colby Covington, it's safe to say that there is going to be a similar path that Colby takes. The path of the supervillain, the path of the bad guy. Colby Covington is on a mission to become the Chael Sonnen of this new generation. Sonnen once said in 2012, prior to a bout against Michael Bisping, "You're looking at the reflection of perfection. You're looking at the man who gets all your attention. You're looking at the man with the biggest arm, at the man with the greatest charm, the man in Chicago who will do no harm to the guy 3 doors down. What you gonna do when you know who? How you gonna deal with the man of steel? How you gonna react to Sonnen's attack?" May I suggest, Brick, that very soon we, the fans, will be asking, how are you going to react to Colby's attack? The new bad guy of MMA. What a time to be a fan.
Honestly, I don't know whether to call this podcast From the Nosebleeds or From the Teardrops anymore, because that was a very profound take, Blake. I gotta be honest. I loved it.
Thank you.
Remember to tune in on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts coming soon. We'd like to just give a quick shout out once again to Don't Be a Richard Music and to Robert Jamais. We are once again grateful for all the support.
We love all MMA fighters. We really appreciate all the support and love we've been getting. Be sure to share. And coming up next week, we will be having a little bit more of a fight analysis. We'll be talking more about post Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis, post DC Stipe Miocic, and what's to come in the world of MMA. We can't wait. Don't be a Richard. Send us off.